A flawless stone tomb built to last forever begins to crumble the moment it is completed. This is the engineering paradox of monuments designed to defy time. We will journey from the pyramids to modern skyscrapers to uncover a startling truth. The very act of fighting decay often invites it in through a hidden back door. By the end, you will understand why humanity's greatest symbols of power are locked in a losing battle with the laws of nature. We will investigate how the strongest Roman concrete can be undone by a simple shift in the earth, and why a perfect polished surface can be a monument's greatest weakness. What do you believe is the ultimate fate of our attempts to leave a permanent mark on the world? That flawless stone tomb stands as a perfect, frozen idea against a world that refuses to stay still. The core of this paradox is not a simple matter of strength versus weakness. It is a far deeper conflict, a fundamental mismatch between a static, unchanging design and a dynamic, ever-changing environment. An ancient architect could plan for 1,000 years of desert sun and wind, calculating every angle and stone. But how could they possibly foresee a gradual rise in the water table, silently undermining the foundation? How could they anticipate the acidic breath of modern industry settling on the polished surfaces, or the relentless, cumulative pressure of millions of tourist footsteps that would never have been part of the original plan? The intention is for eternal stasis, a moment captured in stone forever. The reality is a planet that shifts, breathes, and transforms. This is the first and most profound layer of the paradox, the unavoidable tension between a fixed object and a fluid world. We build a monument to defy one set of forces, only to find it perfectly vulnerable to another we never considered. This inherent flaw in our quest for permanence sets the stage for the inevitable consequences, which are often stranger and more destructive than we could ever imagine. This obsession with legacy echoes from the very dawn of recorded history. The pharaohs of Egypt did not merely build tombs, they engineered mountains of stone to serve as resurrection machines, believing their physical permanence would guarantee eternal life. The emperors of Rome erected triumphal arches and sprawling forums not just to celebrate victories, but to physically rewrite the city's landscape with their own glory. Across cultures and millennia, the psychological drive is strikingly similar, a deep-seated fear of oblivion. What is the point of great power, of vast wealth, if both you and the memory of them are destined to vanish into dust? Monuments became the answer, a desperate and tangible argument against the silence of time. Ancient texts are filled with this anxiety. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the world's oldest stories, the hero's entire quest is sparked by the terror of his own mortality. He seeks to perform such glorious deeds that his name will never be forgotten. This is the core imperative, a cultural engine that fueled the construction of Colossi, meant to outlast languages and entire empires. The paradox we see today, where these structures fight a losing battle with nature, is not a new problem. It is a challenge as old as civilization itself. The builders of the Great Pyramid were already grappling with it, attempting to cheat forces they could not fully comprehend. This historical backdrop forces us to question the very nature of the legacy they sought. If a monument is designed to last forever but is perpetually decaying, what does it truly preserve? Is it the immortal glory of a single ruler, or does it become something else entirely, a testament to humanity's enduring and perhaps futile struggle against the inevitable? The choice of a seemingly indestructible stone is the first step toward a monument's undoing. This initial decision, made with the best intentions for longevity, often plants the seeds of its own destruction, because no material exists in isolation. Every substance interacts with its environment in a long, slow conversation that the original builders could not always hear. They selected for immediate strength and grandeur, but not for the chemical reactions, the subtle expansions and contractions, or the hidden weaknesses that would only reveal themselves over centuries. Consider the Parthenon, that icon of white marble perfection gleaming on the Acropolis. Its builders used iron clamps to lock the massive stone blocks firmly together, a brilliant engineering solution for stability. They never imagined that rain and air would slowly attack that iron, causing it to rust. Rust expands, occupying more space than the original metal, and this relentless, incremental pressure from within began to crack the pristine marble from the inside out. The very mechanism of strength became an agent of destruction. The pyramids of Giza present a different but equally telling story. Their core is massive limestone blocks, a material chosen for its workability and abundance. Yet limestone is chemically vulnerable, slowly dissolving when exposed to even weakly acidic water. For millennia, the dry desert air was its protector. But as climates shifted and pollution introduced new acids into the atmosphere, that same stone began to weather in ways its creators could never have foreseen. The principle here is one of unintended consequences, where the solution to one problem creates a cascade of new ones. A metal clamp solves for gravity but fails against chemistry. A limestone block solves for mass but fails against a changing atmosphere. This is the cruel irony of material selection, where the pursuit of perfect permanence is often thwarted by the very substances chosen to achieve it. What other hidden flaws lie waiting within the stones we trust to last forever? The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as the ultimate test of our principles. We see a monument of breathtaking precision, yet its survival hinges on a series of calculated imperfections. Its original form was something we can barely envision today, encased in a shell of polished Tura limestone. These casing stones were fitted together with such incredible accuracy that the entire structure would have appeared as a single, luminous slope, a perfect geometric form reflecting the desert sun. This flawless exterior was its first line of defense and also its greatest vulnerability. That seamless, gleaming surface was simply too valuable, too perfect to be left alone. Centuries of builders, from Cairo's mosques to fortifications, saw not an eternal tomb but the world's most convenient quarry. They systematically stripped away that protective skin, leaving the rougher core masonry exposed to the elements. The pyramid's own perfection invited its dismantling, a self-defeating cycle where its grandeur made it a target, but the assault did not only come from the outside. The pyramid's brilliant internal design, a marvel of weight distribution and chamber alignment, created its own hidden enemies. The immense, tightly packed stone mass behaves like a giant thermal battery, absorbing heat during the day and slowly releasing it at night. This temperature differential causes moisture in the air to condense deep within the structure, on the very stones meant to last for eternity. That trapped water then dissolves salts from the stone itself, and as it evaporates, those salts crystallize. You can think of this crystallization as a silent, expanding force, like tiny roots growing inside the masonry, exerting relentless pressure that slowly, grain by grain, forces the stone apart from within. So the pyramid's genius, its massive and stable form, inadvertently created the micro-environments that now work to dismantle it. It is a masterpiece of engineering that, in its quest for eternity, designed the pathways of its own slow decay. A structure is never truly finished the moment the last stone is laid. It simply enters a new phase of its existence, one defined by a silent war against change. This leads us to the second core principle, the tyranny of static design in a dynamic world. An engineer's blueprint is a snapshot, a perfect response to the forces understood at that precise moment in history. They calculate for gravity, for the prevailing winds, for the known seismic risks of the region. But the world does not hold still. A foundation that is perfectly stable for 1,000 years can be silently compromised by a water table that slowly rises over centuries, or by the imperceptible, grinding uplift of tectonic plates. The ground beneath our feet is not a solid stage, but a fluid and shifting canvas. The Leaning Tower of Pisa offers the most famous lesson in this principle. Its beautiful, static design was conceived for stable ground, yet its foundation was laid upon a mixture of clay, fine sand, and shells, a soil that compressed unevenly almost from the very beginning. The tower was built to be a vertical bell tower, a fixed and perfect form, but the ground beneath it had other plans, settling more on one side than the other. Its design, frozen in its original intent, possessed no flexibility to correct for this slow-motion disaster. It could not adapt, it could only lean, becoming a monument not to perfect stability, but to a perpetual, precarious imbalance. This is the fundamental vulnerability. We create a rigid object and place it upon a planet that breathes, shifts, and evolves. How can a single design, conceived in one geological era, possibly account for the environmental stresses of the next? It is a battle of fixed intelligence against unpredictable force, and the force always has the final move. The Colosseum in Rome presents a breathtaking contradiction. Its skeleton of arches stands defiantly against the sky, a direct challenge to the passage of 2,000 years. This endurance is not an accident. It is the direct result of Roman concrete, a material so sophisticated that modern science spent centuries trying to rediscover its formula. The Romans mixed lime and volcanic ash, a combination known as pozzolana, which created a chemical reaction that actually grows stronger over time as it continues to crystallize. This concrete is not just resisting decay, it is actively fighting it in a way modern concrete cannot. In this sense, the material itself is a victory against our paradox, a near-perfect answer to the problem of time. Yet the building itself tells a different story, one of slow and inevitable surrender. The Colosseum's brilliant design is the source of its own undoing. Its soaring arches and vast vaults were an architectural revolution, allowing for unprecedented height and seating capacity. But this very complexity created 1,000 hidden vulnerabilities. Every arch has a joint, every vault a corner, every passageway a crevice. For centuries, wind has deposited seeds into these minute pockets of trapped soil. Rainwater has collected and seeped into the porous stone, freezing and expanding in winter. The pollution of the modern city, an element the Roman engineers could never have conceived, settles into these same niches, its acidic chemistry slowly eating away at the legendary concrete from the inside out. The structure is not being attacked as a single, solid mass. It is being disassembled piece by piece along the fault lines of its own magnificent design. Its strength is monolithic, but its decay is a guerrilla war fought in 1,000,000 tiny, hidden battles. Here lies the painful truth. Even a material designed to last forever can be undone by the shape we give it. The Colosseum's grandeur demanded complexity, and that complexity has become a permanent home for the very forces of entropy it was built to defy. So we arrive at the third, and perhaps most ironic, principle of this paradox, the unintended consequences of our own preservation efforts. Our modern desire to save these structures often leads us to fight the symptoms of decay without understanding the deeper, long-term disease. In our rush to freeze a monument in a single moment of perceived perfection, we can disrupt the delicate, slow-moving equilibrium it has established with its environment over centuries. This is not a story of negligence but of misguided love, where the cure can be more damaging than the ailment. A stark example lies in the use of modern materials on ancient stone. For generations, restorers used Portland cement, a substance we consider strong and durable, to repoint the crumbling mortar in historic walls. But this modern cement is far harder and less porous than the traditional lime-based mortars it replaces. Think of the original mortar as a flexible, breathable membrane, allowing moisture that seeps into the wall to evaporate back out. The modern cement acts like a rigid, impermeable seal. It traps that moisture inside the ancient masonry where it has nowhere to go. As temperatures drop, the water freezes and expands, and the pressure has to go somewhere. Instead of crumbling the soft, sacrificial mortar, the force now pushes outward, causing the face of the ancient stone itself to flake off in a process called spalling. Our attempt to strengthen the wall actually makes it weaker, forcing the structure to destroy its own skin to survive. A similar dilemma unfolded high above the Vatican, on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. For centuries, a dark layer of soot from candles and lamps, mixed with animal glue from earlier restoration attempts, had obscured Michelangelo's vibrant frescoes. When conservators undertook the monumental cleaning, the world gasped at the brilliant colors revealed beneath the grime. It was a triumph of art historical recovery. Yet that dark layer was not merely dirt, it had also served as a sacrificial shield, absorbing the subtle pollutants and minor abrasions that would have otherwise struck the original paint directly. By removing it, we returned the artwork to its pristine state, but we also potentially made it more vulnerable to the environmental assaults of the future. The ceiling had established a new, stable condition under its protective patina, and our restoration reset the clock, initiating a new and uncertain chapter in its slow decay. This is the painful lesson of preservation. Our fight against time can unintentionally erase the very history of survival we seek to protect. What does it mean when our helping hand becomes another force of erosion? The pristine white marble of the Taj Mahal was meant to capture a moment of perfect love for all eternity. Yet that same luminous stone has become a canvas for a modern tragedy, silently recording the environmental shifts its creators could not foresee. This monument stands on the banks of the Yamuna River, a structure of breathtaking purity locked in a slow, invisible war with the air itself. The marble is not a solid, impermeable block, but a porous material, and it breathes in the atmosphere around it. Over the centuries, the clean air of Agra has been replaced by a haze of industrial and vehicular pollution. This pollution mixes with rainwater to form a weak acid, and when this acid rain falls on the magnificent domes and minarets, it does not simply wash away. It soaks into the stone, initiating a chemical reaction that slowly eats away at the marble, transforming its brilliant white surface into a dull, yellowish patina. The very quality that gives the Taj Mahal its ethereal beauty, its reflective and delicate surface, is the trait that makes it so tragically vulnerable. Its perfection is its weakness, but the assault is not only from above. The Taj Mahal's immense weight rests on a foundation of sal wood, a clever and resilient material chosen by its 17th century engineers. This wooden base was designed to function like a permanent sponge, needing to be kept consistently moist by the waters of the Yamuna River to retain its strength and flexibility. For centuries, the river provided this vital sustenance. Now that same river is retreating, a rapidly dropping water table, driven by intensive urban and agricultural use, has left the wooden foundation high and dry. As the wood dries, it loses its structural integrity, becoming brittle and susceptible to cracking. The monument's stability, guaranteed for generations by a reliable environment, is now threatened by a fundamental change in the landscape it was built upon. The builders prepared for floods, but they had no concept of a permanent drought. The Taj Mahal thus embodies the paradox in its most poignant form, a timeless love story written in a material that is actively being unmade by time's new and unforeseen allies. What does it mean when the world we build for becomes a world that destroys what we built? A monument's greatest triumph can also be its most relentless enemy. When a structure succeeds so completely as a symbol that it captures the world's imagination, it invites a constant, loving siege. The very act of human admiration becomes a physical force, a slow, grinding pressure that the original architects could never have planned for. This is the fourth principle, the weight of symbolism and its physical toll. The stones of Machu Picchu, for instance, were laid by the Inca with an understanding of mountain weather and seismic shifts. They were not designed for the rhythmic, daily pressure of thousands of hiking boots ascending the same ancient staircases, each step polishing the granite a little thinner, each touch wearing away the sharp, defined edges of history. The pathways engineered for priests and royalty are now traversed by a river of humanity, and that river is carving a new, unintended geography into the sacred site. The erosion is not malicious, it is the price of global reverence. Inside the enclosed temples of Angkor Wat, a more insidious process unfolds. The original builders calculated for tropical heat and monsoon rains, creating spaces that could breathe with the natural environment. They could not anticipate the microclimates generated by crowds of visitors. Every person exhales moisture and radiates body heat. In a confined stone chamber, this collective human presence dramatically raises the humidity, creating a warm, damp atmosphere perfect for the growth of mold and the migration of salts from within the stone to its surface. This process, called salt efflorescence, appears as a white, powdery crust, but its damage runs deep. The salts crystallize just beneath the surface, pushing the stone apart from within, causing ancient carvings to flake and crumble. The temple walls, which survived centuries of jungle encroachment, are now being subtly transformed from the inside out by the breath of their admirers. This creates a heartbreaking feedback loop. The more famous and culturally significant a monument becomes, the more people it attracts. The more people it attracts, the faster it physically degrades. Its success as an icon directly fuels the very decay it was built to withstand, forcing conservators into a desperate race against time, a race accelerated by the monument's own beloved status. How do we protect these treasures from the consequences of our own fascination? Isolation can be a monument's greatest shield or its most patient executioner. The massive stone moai of Easter Island stand as a testament to this brutal duality. For centuries, their breathtaking remoteness in the vast Pacific Ocean acted as a perfect fortress. While empires rose and fell, while conquerors looted and repurposed stones across Europe and Asia, the moai remained untouched by human hands. They were safe from war, from the quarrying of later civilizations, from the kind of direct human interference that stripped the pyramids of their gleaming shells. This isolation was their primary preservation strategy, a geographical accident that worked perfectly. Yet this same protective bubble created a sealed laboratory for decay. Cut off from the complex checks and balances of a continental ecosystem, the island's environment developed its own unique and destructive rules. Without natural predators, a population of Polynesian rats exploded. These rodents found the soft, volcanic tuff from which the moai were carved to be an ideal material for gnawing, perhaps to wear down their ever-growing teeth. Over generations, they silently scarred the bases of the statues, creating networks of tiny grooves that accelerated the work of the elements. but the most relentless sculptor has been the island's air itself. Positioned completely exposed to the powerful winds of the open Pacific, the moai are constantly bathed in a corrosive mist of salt. This salt-laden wind acts like a slow, invisible sandblaster, scouring the stone day after day, year after year, century after century. It patiently rounds off the sharp angles of a nose, softens the curve of a lip, and slowly erases the deep-set eyes that once gazed inland. The very isolation that saved the moai from us left them utterly defenseless against the unbridled forces of nature. Their paradox is one of environmental context, a stark reminder that a monument does not exist in a vacuum. It is part of an ecosystem, and when that ecosystem is left to its own devices without the mitigating influence of a larger world, preservation can transform into a slow, inexorable form of erosion. What does it mean when the greatest threat to a legacy is not humanity, but the undisturbed peace we assumed would protect it? The ground beneath a monument is not a passive stage, but an active participant in its fate. This leads us to the fifth and perhaps most humbling principle, the confrontation with geological and climatic inevitabilities. These are the planetary-scale forces that operate on timelines far beyond human comprehension, utterly indifferent to our declarations of permanence. An architect can design for a known earthquake risk, but how do you fortify a city against the slow, grinding convergence of continental plates, a process that moves inches per century but carries the force to remake the world? You can plan for seasonal rains, but what is the defense against a climatic cycle that shifts an entire region from a temperate zone into an ice age over 10,000 years? These are not forces you can out-engineer, they are the fundamental rules of the game. The ancient city of Petra, hidden within Jordan's desert canyons, embodies this brutal truth. The Nabateans who carved its magnificent facades directly into the rose-red sandstone cliffs were brilliant hydrological engineers. They designed a complex system of dams, cisterns, and channels to control the very flash floods that occasionally surged through the narrow Siq, the main entrance gorge. For centuries, their system worked, turning a destructive force into a vital resource. But their design was calibrated for a specific climatic rhythm, a certain frequency and intensity of storms. Now, as global weather patterns shift, the region faces the possibility of more frequent and intense deluges. A single, catastrophic flash flood, of a magnitude the original engineers may never have witnessed, could unleash a torrent of water and debris with enough force to scour the delicate, carved stonework from the canyon walls. The Nabateans built a masterpiece to withstand their world, but their world is changing. This is the ultimate layer of the engineering paradox. We build a static object, a frozen intention, and place it upon a dynamic planet whose crust shifts, whose climate oscillates, and whose atmosphere transforms. Our greatest symbols of endurance are, in the grandest view, temporary tenants on a restless earth. How can any design hope to survive the relentless, slow-motion violence of the planet itself? The Acropolis in Athens has faced a siege measured not in years but in millennia. Its gleaming marble has been assaulted by two relentless enemies, the slow chemistry of the atmosphere and the sudden violence of human conflict. While acid rain patiently dissolves the stone, the scars of war tell a more immediate story. A pivotal moment arrived in the 17th century when the Parthenon, then serving as an Ottoman gunpowder store, was struck by a Venetian mortar shell. The resulting explosion was catastrophic, blowing out the building's central core and scattering priceless sculptures. In a single, fiery instant, more structural damage was inflicted than by 1,000 years of wind and rain. This event reveals a cruel twist of fate. A monument's own strength and strategic prominence can make it an irresistible target. Its solid walls, designed for permanence, become a fortress, its elevated position a military asset. The Acropolis thus stands as a layered record of destruction, a palimpsest where the slow, patient handwriting of environmental decay is violently overwritten by the bold, brutal strokes of human history. It forces us to ask, is the greatest threat to a legacy the indifferent forces of nature or the passionate, destructive intentions of our own species? A massive, simple stone dolmen can stand for millennia with a stubborn indifference to the centuries, yet the sprawling, multi-story palace of Knossos, with its labyrinthine corridors and brilliant light wells, now lies in ruins. This contrast reveals a sixth and deeply counterintuitive principle of our paradox. The ambition for grandeur, for scale and complexity, often sacrifices the very simplicity that is the true secret to longevity. The larger and more intricate a monument becomes, the more points of potential failure it engineers into its own skeleton. Every soaring arch is a calculated risk, every internal support column a future liability, and every decorative facade a vast new surface area for the elements to attack. A simple stone slab like a dolmen presents a minimal target to wind, rain, and time. Its strength is its monolithic, uncomplicated form, but a palace is a complex machine for living. The Minoan builders of Crete used enormous, load-bearing wooden columns to support their grand upper floors and open courtyards. This wood was strong, flexible, and beautiful, an elegant solution for creating spacious, airy interiors filled with light. Yet wood, no matter how grand, is biodegradable. It rots. It is susceptible to fire, to insects, to the simple, relentless chemistry of decay. The very material that enabled the palace's architectural brilliance also guaranteed its eventual collapse. The stone foundations remain, but the grandeur that stood upon them vanished long ago, because the complexity of the design demanded a substance that could not possibly fulfill the promise of eternity. This is the cruel trade-off. A builder can choose a simple, robust form that will endure but may lack symbolic power, or they can pursue a complex, awe-inspiring vision that is inherently more fragile. The drive to impress, to dominate a landscape, to create something that has never been seen before, often leads to designs that are marvels of engineering in their moment, but are fundamentally unstable over the grand scale of time. The quest for immortality through scale ironically plants the seeds of a much swifter dissolution. What survives is not always what was most magnificent, but what was most resilient. Stonehenge stands against the sky not as a delicate sculpture, but as a declaration of elemental force. Its massive sarsen stones, some weighing over 20 tons, have endured on the Salisbury Plain for thousands of years, not through intricate engineering, but through a profound and powerful simplicity. The core design is the post and lintel, a concept as old as humanity itself, where one heavy stone is laid horizontally across the tops of two vertical ones. There are no complex arches to collapse, no hidden foundations to be silently undermined. The structure's stability comes from pure physics, the immense weight of the stones locking them into place, creating a form that resists the wind and rain not by deflecting them, but by simply absorbing their force. This is architecture stripped down to its most resilient essentials, while the smaller bluestones, transported from faraway Wales, have weathered more severely and required modern stabilization. The great trilithons, the iconic three-stone gateways, remain stoically in place. Their survival speaks to a counterintuitive truth in our paradox. The builders of Stonehenge avoided the trap of complexity that doomed so many grander projects. They did not seek to create a labyrinthine palace or a soaring temple filled with fragile components. Instead, they worked with the landscape and the raw, unchanging properties of mass and gravity. Their monument's strength is its monolithic nature, presenting a minimal surface for environmental attack and possessing no small, interdependent parts that could fail and bring down the whole. In a world where ambition often demands intricacy, Stonehenge stands as a quiet, enduring reminder that sometimes the most permanent mark is made not with delicate genius, but with undeniable, brute presence. What does its longevity tell us about the true nature of resilience? Perhaps eternity favors not the most complex design, but the most elemental. A stone surface that appears barren and solid is in reality a bustling metropolis for life. The seventh and perhaps most insidious principle of this paradox is the biological onslaught, a relentless siege where life itself becomes an agent of decay. Monuments are never truly sterile mineral fortresses. They inevitably become ecosystems, hosting a slow-moving invasion of plants, fungi, and microorganisms. Each of these tiny colonists wages a silent war against the stone. Lichens and mosses, for instance, are not merely harmless decorations clinging to a surface. They secrete a cocktail of weak organic acids to break down the rock, creating a microscopic foothold that slowly deepens into a pit. These acids patiently dissolve the mineral bonds that hold the stone together, grain by minuscule grain. Meanwhile, the fine, hair-like roots of larger plants seek out the slightest crack in the masonry, drawn by trapped moisture and nutrients. Once inside, these roots swell with growth, exerting a slow hydraulic pressure that can force even the most perfectly fitted stones apart over time. Even bacteria, in a process known as bioweathering, participate in this dismantling, altering the very chemical composition of the minerals from within. The magnificent temples of Khajuraho in India, renowned for their exquisite and intricate carvings of deities and celestial beings, are a heartbreaking testament to this process. The deeply carved details, which tell entire stories in stone, are being slowly blurred and obscured by a persistent, colorful patina of algal and fungal growth. This living film does not simply cover the art, it actively consumes it, its acidic secretions gradually softening the sharp edges of a divine smile or the delicate curve of a sculpted hand. This reveals a profound and unsettling truth in our quest for permanence. The battle against time is not merely a fight against wind, rain, and shifting earth. It is a battle against life's own relentless imperative to grow, to adapt, and to find a way. A static, unchanging design has no permanent defense against this organic, evolving siege. The very forces that animate our world are, in their own quiet way, dedicated to the monument's eventual return to dust. The sprawling stone heart of Angkor Wat did not simply decay, it was absorbed. For centuries, this city of gods lay silent, and the jungle did not wait for an invitation. It launched a full-scale invasion, sending its most determined soldiers into the very cracks of the empire. The strangler fig and the kapok tree became the new architects, their roots like slender, living fingers probing the sandstone masonry. They sought out the weak points, the hairline fractures between blocks, and they grew. What began as a thread thickened into a cable, then a muscular, woody serpent coiling through the walls. The process was one of slow-motion violence, a relentless hydraulic pressure that pried apart stones fitted with impossible precision. In one sense, this was a catastrophic dismantling, a deliberate act of destruction by the natural world. Yet, in a breathtaking paradox, this same assault became the temple's salvation. The same web of roots that was tearing the structures apart also began to cinch them together, creating a living scaffold that held collapsing galleries in a firm, unyielding grip. The jungle was not just a destroyer, it was a brutal, indifferent conservationist, and as the canopy closed high above, it wove a vast green shield. This dense roof of leaves protected the temple's most vulnerable features, the miles of intricate bas-reliefs carved into the sandstone walls. These carvings, which tell the stories of kings and divinities, are exquisitely delicate. Direct tropical sunlight would have baked and fractured the stone, while torrential monsoon rains would have washed the fine details into a smooth, featureless blur. The jungle that was dismantling the monument from the inside was, at the very same time, preserving its skin. This created a fragile and ultimately temporary symbiosis. The stone provided a foundation for the forest, and the forest, in return, provided a protective shell for the stone. It forces a difficult question: did the abandonment of Angkor Wat lead to its ruin, or did that very act of leaving it to the jungle ensure that enough remained for us to find it all? The temple's greatest tragedy and its most miraculous survival are one and the same story. A monument's survival depends on more than just stone and mortar. It relies on a fragile chain of human knowledge passed from one generation to the next. This is the eighth principle, the quiet erosion of craftsmanship, where the very techniques that brought these giants to life can vanish into history, leaving their future guardians powerless. The physical structure might endure for centuries, but the living, breathing intelligence required to understand and care for it can be extinguished in a handful of generations. We are left with the magnificent body, but the spirit that animated it, the deep, tactile wisdom of its creators, is gone. Consider the Inca stonemasons of Machu Picchu. They perfected a technique known as polygonal masonry, fitting massive, irregularly shaped stones together so perfectly that not even a razor blade can slip between them. This was not just about aesthetics, it was a brilliant seismic adaptation, allowing the walls to dance and settle during earthquakes without collapsing. Yet the precise methods for quarrying, shaping, and setting these colossal blocks without modern tools remain a profound mystery. Today, if a stone is dislodged, we cannot replicate the process. We can only attempt to stabilize the structure with our own, often less resilient, methods. The original builders possessed a tactile genius we can observe but not recreate. Similarly, the Roman formula for seawater concrete was a technological marvel, a secret so potent it was lost for over a millennium. Modern scientists have only recently begun to decode its chemistry, discovering the critical role of specific volcanic ash and a unique mixing process that allows the concrete to actually heal its own cracks. For centuries, however, restorers had to use modern Portland cement on ancient Roman structures, a well-intentioned but tragically incompatible material that, as we've seen, can trap moisture and cause more damage than it prevents. Our attempts to help were based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the original material's behavior, a misunderstanding born from a vast historical gap in knowledge. This intellectual erosion creates a devastating paradox. Our desire to preserve is often unmatched by our ability to do so authentically. We look at a leaning wall and see a problem to be fixed with steel braces and chemical consolidants. The original builders saw a conversation with gravity, wind, and stone, a dialogue informed by skills honed over lifetimes. When we replace a hand-carved stone with a machine-cut replica, or use a hard, impermeable mortar where a soft, breathable one was intended, we are not preserving the monument in its true essence. We are creating a hybrid, a patchwork of ancient intent and modern guesswork. The gap in our understanding becomes a doorway through which time can march, slowly transforming a masterpiece into a mere echo of itself. How do we care for something when we have forgotten the language its builders spoke? The very stones of Cusco seem to breathe with the mountain itself. Wandering through the ancient city, you are surrounded by walls composed of massive, irregular blocks, each one a unique geometric puzzle piece locked perfectly against its neighbors without a trace of mortar. These are not the rigid, straight lines of modern architecture. They are a tapestry of stone, a living fabric woven by the Inca. Their genius was not in defying the Earth's movement, but in welcoming it. The Andes are a young and restless mountain range, shuddering with frequent earthquakes. A conventional wall, built with uniform bricks and hard cement, would crack and crumble under such stress, its rigid structure unable to accommodate the shake and roll of the ground. The Inca walls, however, were designed to dance. During a tremor, the intricate polygonal blocks, with their subtle, rounded edges and complex interlocking joints, would shift and sway against one another. They would dissipate the seismic energy through a million tiny, fluid movements, a choreography of stone. When the shaking stopped, gravity would simply settle the massive stones back into their original, stable positions. It was a system of resilience based on flexibility and intelligent mass, not on brute, unyielding strength. This profound understanding of their environment, this seismic wisdom carved into granite, vanished almost overnight with the fall of the Inca Empire. The master stonemasons and the oral traditions that held the secrets to quarrying, shaping, and setting these stones were lost. Today, we look at these walls with a sense of awe and profound mystery. We can analyze the angles and measure the fits, but we cannot replicate the process. The living knowledge, the tactile feel for the stone, is gone. Our modern answer to earthquakes is reinforced concrete, a material that attempts to resist and overpower seismic forces through tensile strength and rigid frames. It is a completely different philosophy, a battle of force against force. The walls of Cusco represent a conversation, a partnership with the natural world that we have forgotten how to speak. They stand not just as a monument to a lost civilization, but as a silent, brilliant challenge to our own engineering assumptions, a testament to a principle of resilience we are still struggling to fully reverse engineer from the stones themselves. A grand monument is born from a single, glorious burst of ambition and funding, but its survival demands an endless river of money and will. This is the ninth and perhaps most pragmatic layer of our paradox. Political fanfare and economic resources for a one-time construction project are often immense and readily marshaled. A king or a nation pouring its wealth into a singular symbol of power. Yet that same society then faces a silent, perpetual bill for cleaning, repairing, and stabilizing that symbol, year after year, century after century, with no grand ribbon-cutting ceremony at the end. It is a transition from a sprint to a marathon with no finish line, and humanity has repeatedly proven to be poor at running the long race. The initial construction is a finite event, a problem with a clear solution. Maintenance, by its very nature, is an infinite, open-ended commitment. Consider the fate of many archaeological sites following a major, internationally funded restoration. There are press conferences, documentaries, and a global sigh of relief as a temple is saved from the brink of collapse. The world's attention and its funding then moves on to the next emergency. But the wind continues to blow, the rain continues to fall, the roots continue to grow, without a steady, unglamorous budget for clearing drains, monitoring cracks, and repointing mortar. The slow decay begins all over again, almost the moment the conservators pack their tools and leave. The spectacular rescue becomes a temporary reprieve, not a permanent solution, because the underlying need for care was never integrated into a sustainable, long-term system. This problem is magnified by the fickleness of political will. A government may champion the preservation of a national monument as a source of cultural pride, allocating generous funds for its upkeep. But when that administration changes, or a new crisis like a recession or a war emerges, those maintenance budgets are often the first to be slashed. The monument, a static and unchanging presence, cannot advocate for itself. Its needs become a low priority against more immediate human concerns, and it begins a slow, quiet backslide into disrepair. This creates a devastating cycle where neglect leads to a new crisis, which then requires another expensive, high-profile rescue mission, draining resources that could have funded a century of simple, preventative care. The true enemy of these eternal symbols is not always a dramatic force of nature, but something far more mundane, the simple, relentless difficulty of securing a permanent budget. How can a society commit to a financial promise that must outlive every one of its citizens and every one of its governments? Perhaps the most radical strategy for immortality is to never truly be finished. While ancient stones crumble from a single, static design, the Forbidden City in Beijing has defied time through a completely different philosophy, one of continuous, deliberate renewal. For over 500 years, this sprawling complex of palaces and courtyards has never been left alone to decay. Instead, it has been the subject of an unbroken cycle of maintenance and rebuilding, a tradition that treats the monument not as a frozen relic, but as a living, breathing entity. Roof tiles are meticulously reglazed in their brilliant imperial yellow. Decayed wooden pillars, eaten by insects or weakened by rot, are carefully removed and replaced with new timbers carved to the exact same specifications. Faded murals and intricate paintings are restored by artisans using the same mineral pigments and techniques passed down through generations. This is not a desperate fight against entropy, but a graceful dance with it. The system accepts a fundamental truth that other preservation efforts often struggle against, that all materials have a natural lifespan. By proactively and systematically replacing these components before they fail, the Forbidden City sidesteps the catastrophic collapses and irreversible erosion that plague so many other sites. This process does, of course, create a philosophical dilemma. If nearly every beam and tile has been replaced at least once over the centuries, can we truly say this is the original Forbidden City? The answer lies in a profound shift in perspective. The value is not held solely in the physical substance of the wood or the clay, but in the uninterrupted transmission of craft, design, and cultural purpose. The building's identity resides less in its atoms and more in its enduring form and function, perpetually sustained by human hands. This approach embraces the core paradox of monumental preservation head-on. It concedes that absolute material permanence is an illusion. In its place, it offers a different kind of eternity, one built on adaptability and cultural continuity. The ultimate key to longevity, then, may not be found in a stone's resistance to change, but in a society's commitment to endless, loving renewal. What survives is not the original block of wood, but the unchanging idea forever carved afresh into the world. Our most advanced tools now offer a way to cheat time itself, not with stone but with light. We can fire millions of laser points at a monument, capturing every crack, every contour, and every faded inscription to build a perfect digital twin. This virtual clone, existing as pure data, seems immune to the physical decay we have traced for so long. It cannot be worn down by tourist feet, scarred by acid rain, or toppled by an earthquake. This is the promise of the digital age, a new frontier for legacy where a monument's soul is lifted from its crumbling body and granted a form of eternal life in the silicon realm. Yet this technological salvation introduces a new and strange layer to our ancient paradox. Can a collection of data points, no matter how precise, ever hold the same cultural weight as the physical object? Standing before the Parthenon, feeling the sun-warmed marble and the sheer scale of its history, is an experience that engages all the senses. A digital model on a screen, for all its perfection, is a ghost of that encounter. It preserves the geometry, but can it capture the awe? The cultural resonance of a monument is tied to its physical presence, its location in a sacred landscape, and the tangible connection it offers to the past. A digital copy, accessible from anywhere, risks becoming just another file in a vast digital archive, stripped of its context and its power to humble us with its reality. And then there is the silent threat of digital obsolescence. Our hard drives and cloud servers are the new pyramids, but they are far more fragile. The data we create today is locked in specific file formats, dependent on specific software to be read. Will anyone in the year 3000 have a machine that can read a modern solid-state drive, or understand the code of a file from a program that has been extinct for centuries? The Rosetta Stone was physically there, waiting to be rediscovered and deciphered. A corrupted digital file is a sealed tomb with no door. We are now in a race not against erosion, but against the rapid, relentless turnover of our own technology. We must constantly migrate our data, update our formats, and refresh our storage, committing to an endless, invisible maintenance of ones and zeros. The digital copy, meant to be our ultimate insurance policy, demands its own form of perpetual care, creating a new, abstract battle in the very old war against oblivion. A violent erasure can sometimes create a more powerful and enduring ghost. The colossal Buddhas of Bamiyan, carved into a cliff face in Afghanistan over 1500 years ago, stood for centuries as serene witnesses to the flow of history. Then, in 2001, their physical existence was terminated in a series of deliberate explosions. This was not the slow decay of wind or water, but a sudden, absolute act of annihilation. The statues were declared idols and systematically blown to pieces, their towering forms reduced to a field of rubble and dust in a matter of days. In that moment, it seemed the ultimate victory had been won by the forces of oblivion, proving that no monument, no matter how massive or ancient, is safe from the destructive will of its own time. Yet, this act of physical destruction triggered a remarkable and unforeseen reaction. A handful of researchers had, years earlier, documented the statues with meticulous care, taking thousands of overlapping photographs for archival purposes. This act of preservation, seemingly mundane at the time, became an act of salvation. Using this old photogrammetry data, a process that extracts precise three-dimensional measurements from two-dimensional images, scientists and artists were able to reconstruct the Buddhas not in stone, but in light. They created perfect holographic projections that could be cast onto the empty niches, and built intricate virtual models that anyone in the world can now explore. The paradox here is chilling. The very act intended to erase the Buddhas from history ultimately guaranteed their liberation from their physical constraints. They are no longer bound to a single valley in Afghanistan, vulnerable to the next war or the next ideological shift. They now exist as data, as an idea that can be copied infinitely and projected anywhere. This forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable question. If the original stone is gone, does the digital ghost hold the same cultural and historical weight? Can a collection of ones and zeros, a perfect simulation, truly be considered the monument, or has it become something else entirely? A memory so precise it feels like a presence, yet one you can never truly touch. The silent, empty niches in the cliff now hold two stories: the tragedy of what was lost and the strange, new promise of what was unexpectedly born from the ashes. Each individual threat we have explored is formidable on its own, but their true destructive power emerges when they begin to speak to one another. This is the interconnected web of failure, a cascade where one vulnerability actively summons the next. A single crack in the stone, born from a material's thermal expansion, is not merely a flaw. It becomes an open door, an invitation. Wind-driven rain seeps into that new fissure, and the trapped moisture promotes the growth of algae. That biological film then secretes acids, widening the crack from the inside, which in turn allows plant roots to penetrate deeper. The roots exert hydraulic pressure, forcing the stones further apart, and this new instability makes the structure more susceptible to the next seismic tremor. The original builders planned for earthquakes, but they did not foresee a scenario where biological and chemical agents would first weaken their walls, making them brittle before the ground even began to shake. This is not a series of isolated problems. It is a chain reaction of decay, where the solution to one crisis is often undermined by the emergence of another. A restoration team might expertly repoint the mortar to seal out water, but if they use a modern, impermeable cement, they inadvertently trap the existing moisture inside, accelerating salt crystallization and spalling. Their successful fix for water infiltration creates a new and more destructive problem of internal pressure. The monument becomes a battlefield where our own interventions can accidentally aid the enemy. This complexity is compounded by the human elements we have discussed. A loss of traditional craftsmanship means the repair is not truly compatible with the original structure. A lapse in political funding halts monitoring just as a new crack begins to form. The weight of tourism introduces vibrations and humidity that accelerate the very processes conservators are trying to stop. All these threads, the environmental, the biological, the material, and the human, are woven into a single, tightening net. To see only the cracked stone is to miss the entire story. The crack is the final symptom of a disease that has traveled through this entire web. Defending against time, therefore, cannot be a series of isolated battles fought against wind, or water, or roots. It demands a unified strategy that understands how the wind brings the water feeds the roots, and our own well-intentioned actions can sometimes close the only escape routes a structure has. How do you protect something when every solution risks creating a new problem? The echoes of ancient failures are now guiding a revolution in modern design. Instead of fighting a losing war against time, a new generation of engineers is learning to negotiate with it. The philosophy is shifting from rigid permanence to resilient adaptability, creating structures that are not frozen monuments but living partners with their environment. A powerful example of this is self-healing concrete. For centuries, a crack in concrete was an irreversible invitation to decay. Now, scientists embed dormant bacteria and nutrients directly into the concrete mix. When a crack forms and water seeps in, it wakes the bacteria. These microorganisms then feed on the nutrients, and as a byproduct, they excrete calcite, a natural form of limestone. This biological process actively fills and seals the crack from the inside out, mimicking the way a wound on your skin heals itself. The material is no longer a passive victim of stress, but an active participant in its own repair. This is a profound departure from the old mindset, turning a vulnerability into a strength. Another radical idea gaining traction is the concept of design for disassembly. Historically, buildings were constructed as permanent fusions of materials, making their eventual demolition a messy and wasteful process. Now, architects are designing structures like temporal puzzles, using bolts and clamps instead of permanent welds and adhesives. Imagine a future skyscraper where the steel beams, glass panels, and even interior modules are designed to be unbolted, removed, and either reused in a new configuration or returned to the manufacturer for recycling. This approach fundamentally redefines a building's lifespan. It is not about building one structure to last 1,000 years, but about creating a system of components that can have multiple lives across centuries, constantly being refreshed and repurposed. The building becomes a dynamic inventory of parts, not a static monolith. This new paradigm accepts the inevitability of change, whether from shifting environmental conditions, new technologies, or evolving human needs. The ultimate lesson from the crumbling pyramids and the salt-scoured Moe is not that we must build stronger, but that we must build smarter. The goal is no longer to create an immutable object destined to lose a battle with a dynamic planet. The future of longevity lies in designing for a graceful and enduring dialogue with time itself, creating structures that can change, adapt, and therefore truly last. From the deserts of Egypt to the jungles of Cambodia, we have traced the intricate and often tragic dance between human ambition and temporal reality. The stones we raise to defy the ages have taught us a humbling lesson that eternity cannot be captured in a single, static design. It is not a destination reached through perfect geometry or indestructible material, but a continuous, unending process of adaptation, care, and profound respect for the forces of a living world. The ultimate legacy of these structures may not be their physical permanence, which is always a losing battle, but the powerful stories they inspire and the wisdom they impart about our own fleeting place in the vast sweep of history. They stand as grand, beautiful arguments against silence, reminding us that while we can never stop time, we can create meaning that truly transcends it. If this exploration has changed your perspective on the marks we leave behind, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to continue this journey into history's greatest mysteries with us.